Ja trochu zosumarizujem to, čo sme už dneska prešli s našimi zahraničnými speakerami. Budeme sa baviť o území, ktoré, že tu je niekde Mickiewičova. My sme ešte úplne predtým, ako sme začali vôbec s týmito eventami, robili participatívne stretnutia so susedmi, ale aj mapovanie ulice a jej okolia. A začali sme tým, respektíve na susedských stretnutiach, tak ako sme sa stretli tu, sme vlastne zistili, že skoro každá ulica alebo verejný priestor v okolí Mickiewičovej má svoje OZ-ko. Šialené. A tak sme ich skúsili zmapovať, takže ja vám... Tí, čo ste z Bratislavy, asi to poznáte, ale aby sme si všetci boli na tej istej úrovni, tak začnem iniciatívou Živé námestie, ktorá nedávno predstavila svoje výsledky a bola to vlastne iniciatíva okolo starej tržnice, čiže znova nejakí odborníci, verejnosť, veľký participatívny proces. Obchodná, myslím, že sme tu mali aj niekde výsledok. Obchodná bola tiež iniciatíva lokálnych prevádzok a zástupcov plus odborníci a vydali, tuto máte vlastne taký manuál reklamy, čo bola vlastne výnimočná vec v Bratislave, lebo sa všetci spojili pre takýto je vlastne regulatív, ktorý si sami vymysleli. Green Foundation robilo na kolárku, participatívny proces, naozaj veľký zapojilo všetky iniciatívy, ktoré sú v okolí, to sme sa snažili urobiť aj my tu. A Kmeťovo námestie, kde sme dnes skončili, tiež sa snaží v takej menšej mierke o revitalizáciu, nie je to vnútroblok, ale je to také malé námestie. Tu sú vlastne tie výstupy, ktoré som spomínala, môžeme ísť ďalej. Čo sa v oblasti ale deje, keďže je vo veľmi atraktívnej časti mesta na kraji centra, je, že sa veľmi zahusťuje. Je tu veľa developerských aktivít, veľa projektov a nebudem ich všetky vymenovať, ale čo majú spoločné, čo sme si všimli, je, že sami investujú do verejných priestorov vo svojej režii, hej, tak ako WhatCity alebo Corvin a vlastne aj ITV. Čo sa tu teda deje? Dobre, ešte verejný sektor. Asi viete, že bol taký projekt, myslím si, že to bolo z fakultou architektúry, na vybudovanie cyklotrasy na Radlinského. Mesto Bratislava spolu s HBRVIS, súťaž na námestie Slobody, aktivity, o ktorých som vlastne nevedela, že Slovenská technická univerzita chce niečo spraviť s tým svojím vnútroblokom, ktorý je medzi stavebnou chemickou fakultou, iniciatíva DEL medickej a ako reaguje mesto, rekonštruuje električkovú trať. No a my sa dnes budeme vlastne rozprávať o tom, čo je aspoň pre mňa taká téma, ktorá v Bratislave vlastne sa deje, rezonuje, ale nikto o nej nehovorí priamo a to je vlastne spolupráca verejného súkromného sektora. Čiže budeme sa pýtať, čo to vlastne znamená, že HBRVIS sponzorovalo súťaž na námestie. Čo to znamená, že developer tu chce si tu nakresliť ulicu. Čo to znamená, hej, a tak ďalej. My sme dnes prišli na konci tej prehliadky na Kmeťovo námestie a ten človek z Corvinu, neviem teraz, niekde tu je, začal ukazovať vizualizácie revitalizovaného Kmeťovho námestia, ktoré vlastne financoval Corvin ako developer, ktorý je v susedstve. A prišla tam suseda, ktorá tam zrovna venčila psa a bola veľmi nahnevaná. Čiže má byť rada, lebo tam niekto financuje jej verejný priestor, vlastne bez toho, aby sa ona o to nejak pričinila, alebo je to vlastne nejaká privatizácia? Toto sú otázky, ktoré budeme si dnes klásť. Podľa mňa je to celkom dôležité hovoriť o tom práve v tejto chvíli a práve v Bratislave. OK?
OK, ďakujem. Takže ešte z toho posledného slajdu vzniklo, že je tu nejaká tripartita nejakých sektorov, ktoré tu vnášajú viac či menej. A že tá otázka je, že ktorým smerom teraz pôjdeme, lebo teraz sa tie projekty dejú, takže teraz treba konať. Ja po tomto by som chcela zavolať hneď už Tomáša Šeba, aby si odprezentoval vlastne projekt Mickiewičke. Funguje to, netreba spoločať tú hornú časť, to sa stáva. Dobre.
Náš projekt Mickiewičke už má 4 roky, ako som spomínal v príhovore. To je úplný začiatok. Počujete ma takto? Toto je výňatok z prvej štúdie, ktorú sme robili ešte pred tými spomínanými 4 rokmi, keďže tu žijeme už 10 rokov na tejto ulici. Všímali sme si v čom má táto ulica problém, pretože sme ich vnímali podvedome, ale potom sme začali za nimi seriózne zamýšľať. Od bežných vecí typu chýbajúci parter a zavádzajúce slupy trojového vedenia a takéto vstupné analýzy, čo všetko tam konkrétne vadí. Sme sa dostali k spolupráci s fakultou architektúry, ktorá bola veľmi plodná, trvala pol roka, kde piataci urobili zhruba 20 návrhov, ako vylepšiť Mickiewičkovú ulicu a jej okolie, to znamená tak počnúť s urbanovými kasárnami a končiať až Americkým námestím alebo až Polianským námestím. Vzniklo naozaj množstvo dobrých návrhov, bola v tom recepcia s podporou aj municipality a odbornej verejnosti. Potom sme si ale uvedomili, že vlastne ten problém je oveľa širší, pretože keď si uvedomíme, kde je Mickiewičova situovaná, ako sme sa dneska mali možnosť aj s našimi zahraničnými hostiami presvedčiť, tak ona je vlastne situovaná na veľmi dôležitej trase, ktorá vedie z absolútneho centra starého mesta po obchodnej cez veľmi atraktívne mestské priestory, cez Americké námestie až v podstate k Trnavskému mýtu. Toto všetko, ako ste aj videli, je v žalostnom stave momentálne, ale má veľký potenciál. V prípade, že by sa stalo jednou súvislou líniou, tak by to veľmi pomohlo celej štvrti. Toto je ale paralizované tranzitujúcou dopravou, ktorú sme videli, ktorá prichádza z troch smerov, od Petržalky, od Ružinova, od Nív, a tá vlastne paralizuje tento maličký kúsok ulice, ktorý sme si spolu pozreli, bolo také úzké hrnov. Takže nadobudli sme pocit, že zásadná vec, ktorú treba najprv vyriešiť, aby ulica mohla začať žiť, je doprava. Konkrétne tranzitujúca doprava. Malo by to byť vyriešené v súlade s pôvodnými plánmi Bratislavy. Napríklad toto je prekreslený plán od Milana Strivu, dopravný inžinier, ktorý je medzi nami, ktorý je spoluautorom našej štúdie. A ktorý predpokladal ešte v 80. rokoch, že Bratislava bude organizovaná cez svoj vnútromestský obchvat, obsluha centra. A centrum bude slúžiť na skutočne obslužné ulice, ktoré budú slúžiť pre lokálne ciele, nie pre tranzit. Tá situácia však taká nie je, čo sme videli aj sami, tu sú rôzne prekážky a tak ďalej, že do čoho to vlastne hustí parkujúce autá a tak ďalej, nemusíme sa o tom rozširovať. Dezorientácia chodcov pri východe z obchodnej, ktorú sme mali možnosť tiež zažiť, a všade prítomný hluk a tak ďalej. Dali sme si urobiť, alebo Milan Striva nás spracoval dopravný prieskum, ktorý potvrdil to, čo sme tušili, že vyše 90% dopravy v tomto území je tranzitujúce, to znamená, je to doprava, ktorá tu nemá čo hľadať. Takže dostali sme odporúčania, aby sme túto dopravu eliminovali, respektíve motivovali chodiť po trasách, ktoré sú pre ňu určené. A tým sa zároveň zlepšia podmienky pre MHDčku a pre alternatívne druhy dopravy. Zrazu z ničoho nič sa udial taký malý pilotný projekt, pretože kvôli rekonštrukcii električkovej trati na Špitálskej ulici bola jedného dňa minulú jeseň Mickiewičova ulica uzavretá. Ako sme očakávali, doprava v meste neskolabovala, ale zase za pár dní zistili ľudia, že je tu možnosť zadarmo zaparkovať, takže pribudlo nám na ulici cca 30 nových nových aut, ktoré tam stali celé dní. Ďalší taký úsmevný príbeh je z nedalekej Krížnej ulice, po ktorej sme išli. Táto snímka je z obeda. Ráno začali rekonštruovať túto časť ulice. Už na obed tu parkovali ďalšie auta. Z toho dochádzame k záveru, že snaha lidovej dominancie automobilov nevedie nikam. My neobjavujeme žiadnu Ameriku, som rád, že tu máme hosti, ktorí majú za sebou takéto success story aj z Čiech, aj z zahraničia a my sa tešíme, že sa s skúsenosťami s nami podelia. Doplním pána starostu v tej hierarchii, chodec, MHD, cyklo, zdieľaná doprava a na poslednom mieste auta. Je to veľmi zaužívané, treba z Holandsko, o čom určite budú vedieť rozprávať holandskí hostia, tam je auto na konci potravinového rebríčka. Takže v čom spočíva náš návrh, ktorého cieľom je posilniť alternatívne druhy dopravy. Toto je súčasný stav, veľmi zjednodušene. Kolárovo námestie, Križovatka a Americké námestie. Jazdí sa o všetkých smeroch, auta stoja všade ďalej. Videli sme to na vlastné oči, zažívame to denne. Náš návrh je v prvej etape, ktorá bude veľmi jednoduchá. Bude sa doslova pár stoviek eur premalovať značky, osadiť nejaké v tabule. A spočíva v tom, že spomínané úzke hrdlo pri urbanových kasárniach by sme odľahčili od osobnej automobilovej dopravy. Samozrejme trolejbusy MHD by fungovala nerušene ďalej. A osobná automobilová doprava by sa pretrasovala od obidvoch smerov okolo Faxkopy. To znamená, toto totálne tí, čo chcú tranzitovať z jedného mesta na druhý, stratia akúkoľvek motiváciu, kade to ísť. V druhej etape by sme pokročili ďalej, ak by sa to teda osvedčilo. Radikálnejšie zmene, to znamená opäť prioritou je mestská hromadná doprava, ktorú na Kolárovom námestí navrhujeme veškerú dopravu, alebo všetku dopravu presunúť na jednu stranu Kolárovho námestia, ktoré sme videli ráno. A trolejbusy a mestská hromadná doprava by chodili spomínaným úzkým hrdlom, ktoré malo podobný režim, alebo rovnaký režim ako obchodná ulica. A osobná individuálna doprava by chodila len v jednom smere, čo by umožnilo to, že autá, ktoré v súčasnosti parkujú na chodníkoch, by parkovali tam, kde majú, to znamená na ceste. Nechceme rušiť dočasné parkoviska. Malinká zmena mestskej hromadnej dopravy sa udiala v tom, že trolejbusy v jednom smere by chodili nezmenene a v druhom smere by vznikla nová zastávka pri medickej záhrade, opäť za veľmi minimálne náklady. Vzniknú nám 3 zaujímavé mestské priestory týmto opatrením a vlastne plnohodnotná línia, ktorá vlastne spojí tú spomínanú dlhú líniu z centra mesta do nového mesta. Pozrieme si postupne, toto je spomínané námestie 9 aut, ktoré sme videli ráno. A namiesto neho si predstavujem niečo takéto. To znamená, je to námestie pred kultúrnym centrom, ktoré je miestom pre výstavy, je prirodzeným vyústením obchodnej ulice, je prirodzeným pokračovaním a zároveň je dôležitým prestupným bodom z električiek na trolejbusy a tak ďalej. Ďalší bod, Faxkopy, o ktorom sme zase išli, tu je množstvo dopravy, tu vznikajú tie zápchy, ktoré sme videli. A vďaka zjednosmerneniu vznikne niečo oveľa príjemnejšie, tie podniky, ktoré tu už sú, len ich nikto necíti, lebo ich kilujú auta, by sa zrazu vyťahli na ulicu a život na ulici by sa spomalil. No a potom samotné vyústenie v metropolke k Americkému námestiu na začiatok pokračovania tej línie ďalej by to mohlo vyzerať takto, nemusím to asi komentovať. Benefity návrhu sú naozaj nízke počiatočné náklady. A potom vznikne pohodlné pešie prepojenie Staré mesto, Nové mesto a zrýchli sa doprava MHD, vzniknú nové verejné priestranstva a zníži sa hluk, ktorý naši zahraniční hostia napriamo zažili do obeda. Len pre krátku informáciu naše ďalšie aktivity, ktorými sa snažíme na toto poukázať, na túto prerušenosť Bratislavy. Navrhovali sme projekt premostenia Einsteinovej a chystáme sa na projekt revitalizácie Štefanikovej ulice, ktorá má podobný problém ako Mickiewičova, znova je raz považovaná iba za ďalšiu dopravnú tepnu. A ja som veľmi rád, že dnes tu máme človeka, ktorý má za sebou takúto úspešnú transformáciu, o ktorej nám určite rád povie. A ďakujem vám za pozornosť.
Mikrofóny fungujú asi 10 minút, takže to by malo byť pre vás dostatočné. vykročený časový limit. Honza, Kolárovo námestí.
Dobrý den. Já vám ve stručnosti představím aktivity nadace Green Foundation na Kolárově náměstí v rámci projektu tzv. Revitalizace Kolárova náměstí. My jsme si tam vytyčili na začátku dva základní cíle. První byl ten prostor rychlými fyzickými intervencemi dostat do nějakého důstojného stavu pro nějakého, řekněme, krátkodobé využívání, směrované k celkové rekonstrukci, o které už se mluví nějakou další dobu. Druhý cíl byl pomocí participativního procesu za první propojit všechny aktéry v tom prostoru a společně zadefinovat budoucí vizi, respektive základ budoucí vize toho prostoru, jakým by mohl fungovat. A tyto dvě aktivity jsme vlastně zrealizovali v minulém roce. Pojďme na ten samotný prostor. Kolárovo náměstí chápeme jako v podstatě velmi unikátní náměstí, které v Bratislavě nemá obdobu z několika důvodů. Je to předně, a to bylo vlastně ukázané na slajdy, které tady předřečník Tomáš ukazoval, je to obrovský dopravní uzel. Je to uzel pro pěší dopravu, je to uzel pro hromadnou dopravu, bohužel v tuto chvíli je to i určitý uzel pro individuální automobilovou dopravu. Současně je to náměstí, které disponuje poměrně velikou a kvalitní zelení a v neposlední řadě je to náměstí, na kterém působí několik velmi silných institucí, hlavně vzdělávacích institucích a kulturních institucí, které jeví veliký zájem do toho prostoru aktivně vstupovat programovými aktivitami, tak aby vlastně to velké množství lidí, které se tam každodenně pohybuje, nějakým způsobem oslovili a vtáhli do těch svých kamenných budov a pro ty programy, které tam realizují. Tato kombinace nikde jinde v Bratislavě vlastně neexistuje. To je činí právě z toho našeho pohledu poměrně unikátní. To, co je činí poměrně opět unikátním, je ten stav, v kterým se nachází. V podstatě z důvodu developerského plánu výstavby garáží, který se z různých právních důvodů zasekl, ten prostor visí před na jakémsi vzduchoprázdnu, kdy ani developer, ani vlastně veřejná správa nějakým způsobem nevstupují a ten prostor prostě dlouhodobě chátral. Tady pár ukázek z toho, jak to vlastně tam vypadalo předtím, než jsme se pustili do těch fyzických intervencí. Ty fyzické intervence spočívaly v tom, že jsme nejprve samozřejmě náměstí vyčistili, bylo tam v podstatě, nevím, jestli to je přesně, ale něco přes tunu odpadů, střepů, celá řada dalších jiných odpadků. Nefungovalo osvětlení, které se podařilo obnovit, proběhla údržba zeleně, vyčistilo se vlastně grafity, opravil se základní mobiliář, takže vlastně zejména lavičky, které na tom náměstí jsou, můžou už opět zase používat a podařilo se tam ještě vytvořit takový nový ústřední grafický prvek na budově bývalého Slatoru, dneska restaurace.
To jsem ty nebyla?
Druhá část, kterou jsem zmiňoval, byl onen participativní proces, který vedla PDCS a zde přítomná Zora Paulíniová. Ten proces probíhal vlastně v průběhu celého minulého roku, zúčastnilo se ho na 60 lidí, primárně z institucí na náměstí působících, ze samosprávy, ať už starého města či magistrátu, celá řada expertů, dopravních, přes zeleň, přes programování veřejných prostranství, ale i různí aktivisté. Ten proces probíhal formou kulatých stolů, které byly tematicky vymezené a které diskutovaly a rozvíjely vlastně konkrétní aspekty toho prostoru. Součástí toho procesu byly i mapovací aktivity, ať už mapovací aktivity přímo v terénu, či dotazníková šetření a tak dále. Tohle jsou vlastně nejdůležitější nebo respektive nejzávažnější doporučení, která v rámci toho procesu byla pojmenovaná. Třeba číst. Jenom rozchrnutí, aby náš mecenáš měl radost, že to i zaznělo. My jsme vlastně celé ty aktivity financovali z našich vlastních prostředků. V tuto chvíli, vlastně, když započítáme tento workshop, tak ta investice z Green Foundation čelila nějakých zhruba 40 000 eur. V rámci toho procesu a zejména sesíťování těch klíčových institucí na náměstí působících a dalších aktérů, jako je právě třeba ITV v souvislosti s Mickiewičovou ulicí, se ukázalo, že je tady celá řada jako velmi silných, velmi zajímavých aktérů, kteří mají nějaký eminentní zájem na změně toho prostoru. Bohužel neexistuje tady v tuhle chvíli aktér, který by byl schopný takovéto aktivity a takovéto jednotlivé zájmy koordinovat. To nám právě vyšlo jako jeden z nejdůležitějších požadavků, ať už formulovaný vůči těm aktérům dovnitř navzájem, nebo hlavně teda primárně vůči veřejné správě, v tomto případě magistrátu a starému městu, co je potřeba, a to je prostě vytvoření nějaké koordinační funkce, ať už nějaké externí či dislokované z rámci veřejných kapacit. Na závěr, a to je i vlastně to, co vzešlo z té participace jako klíčové výzvy, a to, co i chápeme jako určitý potenciál otázek pro dnešní workshop, jsme se už pokusili sformulovat formou otázek, jak vlastně dále pokračovat. Máme vytvořený nějaký elementární shodu nad tím, že ten prostor je potřeba výrazně oživit, že je potřeba výrazně uklidnit dopravu, ale jak dále v tom pokračovat, abychom se nám to podařilo zrealizovat v praxi. Děkuji.
Ďakujem, takže toto bola taká rýchlovka, sme iba 10 minút pozadu, čo je OK. Tak odškrtávam. Tak a teraz sa prejdeme do tej možno najväčšej prezentácie, na ktorú čakáte. Musíme to trošku pripraviť, ale začneme s Slovinskom, teda Ljubljanou. A ja teda vás privítam. Mr. Kožel, welcome here. This is your audience. And I need to just change the presentation because it's not here.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, and especially dear colleagues from NGOs. I have been invited to present you the project of Slovenska cesta. Conversion which completely changes the sensation of the public space and especially the behavior of pedestrians, bicyclists and drivers, managing the dynamic traffic situation on this street. Slovenska cesta occupies the central part of Ljubljana longest main road and represents the main development axis, which stretches from the northern to the southern park and ride terminals on the highway junctions. The street is one of the main CBD areas close to the governmental and close to the historic city center. The street is the central part of Ljubljana longest arterial road and lies on the Cardo Maximus axis of the former Roman city, which constitutes the first urban matrix of Ljubljana. Along the main road, several landmarks, historic buildings, churches, and Roman remains are making visible the flow of more than 2,000 years history of the city. Besides its representative function, the street is dividing the most densely populated promenades passing through the city center. And 3 walkways crossing Slovenska cesta running from the old city to the Tivoli Park, which is the largest city park. And the intention of the project was therefore to improve safety by reducing the collision between vehicles and pedestrians on crossing. After many years of road widening, adding new traffic lanes while narrowing the sidewalks to minimal extent, the former avenue has been degraded in ugly and polluting traffic corridor. Cycling infrastructure was bad, disconnecting lanes for public buses were steadily occupied by private cars during peak hours. Crowded buses, of course, created discomfort for travelers. So parallelly to the urban design and infrastructure project, the city has launched the traffic reform by radical reduction of motorized traffic within the city center. From the very beginning, as you can see on this map, the network of pedestrian areas expanded in 6 years for 700%. This is huge. That is a radical measure, you can imagine. And we declared this network of pedestrian network as a continual shared space, where the pedestrian cyclists could share those learning and experiencing the cohabitation among them. This is called Ljubljana approach. This was the most risky sustainable mobility measure in the city. The main strategic goal of Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, adopted in 2012, was to balance the modal split and increase the use of public transport, meaning that 1/3 of trips would happen by private vehicles, 1/3 by public transport, and 1/3 by non-motorized means. The project of Slovenska cesta conversion embodies this new balance. The redesign of busy thoroughfare into complete street was foreseen in traffic projects and action plans, as you can see here. At the beginning, we started implementing different urban design projects which have affected significant impact on traffic situation and traffic culture in the city. The rearranged public spaces served as a catalyst for the regeneration of the historic center. Before implementing the sustainable measures on Slovenska cesta, we had taken into consideration the ability of the community to accept changes and, what is more important, to experience them. The objective and complementary measures, such as op-art road marking and innovative street equipment, was to test the options for introduction of shared space on the main street of the city. So we started, as you can see, with initial small, low-budget interventions. We are occupied by staging of different street art events, as your street festival, for instance, and social performance to prepare the people to new shape and new function of the street. Redesigned, of course, for the public life. With them, we tested how the removal of motor traffic generates reviving of public spaces. Just the opposite, this is important message, to considering the traffic as a sign of vitality, which is not true. In order to moderate the impact of closing the shortcut through Slovenska cesta, we decided to assure two additional preconditions to this measure. To redirect the oncoming traffic and make it possible rerouting of increased traffic flows, we have built new connecting road, this one, on the left side, to the northern motorway. After that, we have built a new bridge, there is a double-decker bridge on the right side, in order to complete the inner road for bypassing the city center. So it is not one-way measure, one-way project, but it's systematic road. As we decided to use experimental approach to changes, consecutive temporary closing of the street to most of through traffic and provisional street furnishing aim to test the response of bus drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians to the new predicted traffic conditions. on the World Car Free Days, different campaigns and special presentations were organized to inform the public about the benefits of extending the sidewalks and the bicycle lanes, of building the main public transportation hub, of planting the new avenue, and revitalization of the shops in the ground floors. In continuation, the Architects Association has invited innovative architect designers and other professionals to propose their visions in order to cooperate in creating new, strong, recognizable identity of the Main Street by which to increase public sensibility for aesthetically pleasing public space. So after that, the city decided to accomplish the project in collaboration with 4 offices that created a synthetic final design solution. About then narrowing space for motor traffic, widening space for pedestrians and bicyclists, planting trees, and reactivating outdoor activities were the main strategic operation of the project. On the central part of the street, 4-lane was redesigned in 2-lane road, which is intended to public transport, running way, and occasionally local delivery. The former road infrastructure was replaced with the new street design that could be easily shared and on flattened road surface with marginally raised curbs and regulated without any traffic lights or signals. So we started, as you can see, with excavation, which is the Roman figures here, and to modernize the infrastructure. Namely, this is the secret of our projects, that this is not, that this project of regenerating of public spaces is a joint venture between the municipality and between the so-called public entrepreneurs, so public companies, for energy supply, for sewer, for water supply, for energy supply. So we see bus stops were concentrated on 2 terminals serving the main 11 inner city lines. Selected lines cover more than 80% of passengers transferring in the city center. The whole section of the street between central bus stops areas was designed as raised crossing area, and the new designed bus stops respect special requirements regarding the limitation of space, amount of travelers, and the dynamic traffic conditions on the street. So that you can see this is not fake. Really. This is a real photo. This is for me the beloved confrontation between this little boy and the oncoming bus. But however, the conversion of Slovenska cesta into shared space was one of the most demanding and risky sustainable mobility measures we have ever introduced in the city. In spite of doubts and hesitations on the beginning of the project, the people, and especially the bus drivers, expected the new conditions smoothly and with enthusiasm. For that reason, the project surprisingly works. So this is the new atmosphere on the main street of capital of Slovenia. Namely, we believe that the revitalization of the city center in recent years contributed a lot, even to the revival of business activity in the area. This is important. They're not only, social benefits and improvement of environment in the streets, but this is the sort of revival of economic, of local economies of this. This is important. Namely, developers and local community have begun considering the quality of public space as the most important element in shaping the image of a success. Link between various use of streets, squares, and footpaths created a memorable environment for all the residents and visitors to the city. Such a mutual interaction then provides a good condition for tourists, for business, for shopping, for cultural, for entertainment and leisure activities in the city center, Ljubljana. Since Ljubljana is clearly visible on the European map, the number of visitors is growing. Annual growth of tourist visits is around 70% a year. We have opportunity to gain new foreign investors and thereby further strengthen the economic indicators. So, as you can see, we are continuing. This is our strategy. Because this is never-ending story. The regeneration of cities is never-ending story. So this is the next project, which is, as you see, under construction now. This is adjacent to the Slovenski Street. We started with bottom up. Excavation of the Roman cemetery, below the street. And this is maybe important to show you the first foreign direct investment happened last year on the Slovenski Street. So this is one of the benefits, this I emphasize. So this is a new investment in weight. And this is the first intercounty hotel in Ljubljana with 5 stars. Maybe they're 5. So what is what is the message? The message is that how to persuade traffic authorities and the police that this pilot project in Slovenska Cesta represents a progressive step toward a new culture in the public life remains my top priority. Because Slovenska Cesta conversion was still a pilot project. It is using the right for experimentation. It was built deliberately. Now we are trying to find out whatever legal cover for this project. Maybe it is the most important message I can relate to you. Please be courageous. And on the end, with regard to the positive response of the people's experience other conventional streets, we are continuing to rearrange into complex streets. Thank you.
I would like, because we still have some time, and we promised that we will give you opportunity to ask 1 or 2 questions. So we're going to come here, and we give the microphone to the audience. So whoever has any kind of common stuff question has a unique chance now, because then we go into groups. There, lady first.
Thank you. I would like to ask for the dimensions of the street. If it is comparable to Mickiewičke Street, or it is larger?
It is larger.
Please. Maybe the
Hello. Let's ask, what was the most difficult part of the project?
The most difficult part was taking risk. This is because first of all, we need to persuade people to convince them that we are doing well.
How did you do that?
Okay. by showing them good examples. No? This is the only way how to convince the people that we are doing well. So nowadays, as I know, please do believe me because this is officially, 92% of inhabitants of Ghana are supporting this project. They're 92 because we have to measure after the project is complete, is accomplished, we have to measure what is the response of the society, what is the response of the common people there. You know, and it is, for that reason, this project surprisingly works.
I have a question connected to that, because you said we started as an illegal project, but I don't think illegal can exist within a system. Okay, but how did you challenge to make the change from illegal to legal, and how hard is it in the current
we are pressing the authorities, the state authorities, to change the regulations.
Okay, but are you part
because
of
the shared space is not on their agenda.
Are you part of the legislation or the government, or are you part of the stakeholders?
I'm part of. I'm not part of administration. I'm free mind.
Okay. But you're the deputy mayor, so
somewhere in between.
okay. People vote for you. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
The reason why we chose Ljubljana, because the mentality and system of legality and illegality very close to ours. So the system of HEX is actually very important for us. And I ask you because we spoke 1 week ago and I asked you how is this possible to change 700 person, and you said the trick is to keep it in secret. So maybe,
the large pictures, yes, of course.
So we never showed radical change to the people because they will stop you.
The larger picture is this is logical because it's too large. You know.
Okay. We are dancing around the same question. So the question is, you said we. So who is this we? Was it a political
Municipality.
decision? Okay.
City government.
And who came with the idea? What's behind? Was it a political decision? Was it like expert or
My first task after I have been elected, first time, was to create a city vision. And this is on the city vision. It's written there. Sorry.
Okay, any more questions? Oh, Dutch corner.
Thank you very much. It's a great project that you are presenting, and it seems to be also a very radical approach. If you compare it to the project that is being proposed now for this street in Bratislava, do you think the project here in Bratislava is radical enough, or is it still too much trying to accommodate the traffic in Bratislava?
I don't know what is the context of the city, you know, so that I cannot respond to this question, but this question is, this is the right question, you know. I don't know, because first of all, you have to cultivate the community. You have to prepare, by preparing it to accept changes. And I'm repeating, not only to accept changes, but even to live in them, to experience it with the changes. This is the most important. But everything depends on the context. Maybe it's too radical.
Any more questions? So I will only say, after the 6 months when you created Vision, you told me you already had almost 100 projects on your table, which you knew that you were going to implement. And slowly by there, you started to connect them. So we call it Salamová metóda, Sosit method. Could be.
Yeah, this is the only reasonable approach is a piecemeal or gradual approach to the regeneration of the city. It's a logical. But
And what's also
but,
important
but,
is
it should be, or ought be, carried out systematically, continuously.
And the last thing, what was important, that the mayor was on your side, and he delegated the work to you, and he let you do whatever you could. If this is the clean room now. That's
I'm yes,
important.
somehow empowered, yes, but generally speaking,
Because we
it's
all are asking how, so this is part of how. Thank you very much.
total pleasure.
You will meet him several times. Now we ask, it's our pleasure to welcome first time US speaker at WhatCity, so we are stretching. Charlie McCabe is the expert for parks, but before he was working in the tech sector until he couldn't do it anymore, and he's changed for this green areas, and we ask him for to come here for a simple reason. Why to fundraise for something that is producing leaves like trees? Why to fund the greenery and how to do it? So maybe one project is more like Mickiewičke, the other one is more like Kolarov.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to tell a story about parks in the United States, and I'm going to start with a park that's in New York. This is Central Park. This is actually the reservoir in Central Park, and about 38 years ago, a group of citizens got together and approached the city of New York and said, we want to revitalize Central Park, because at that point it had been neglected for about 40 years, and it was in need of hundreds of millions of dollars of work. So over the last 38 years, they have rebuilt the park. It's 845 acres in the middle of Manhattan. It's one of the most densest parts of the city of New York, and they've really brought it back. And the story that I'm going to tell you today is really a story of collaboration. It's between the public sector, our government officials, appointed officials, professionals, and the nonprofit sector or the NGO sector that pursue a variety of projects in different ways. So the most important thing to remember is that parks are not just one thing, especially in cities nowadays. Parks can be areas that are not all that big. They can be areas in the middle of a road. This is a park in Boston. It's called the Rose Kennedy Greenway. I worked there for about 4 years. And this is the fountain that's the heart of the park. And in the summer, we'll have 400 to 500 people just standing in this fountain, which is really great. And it's in the heart of the city. This used to be a 4-story high, 6-lane elevated freeway that cut the city in two in the 1950s until about the year 2000. They put the highway underground, they did a lot of other things, and they built a park on top, which is really cool. Give you a couple other examples of parks that are public-private partnerships. This is Brooklyn Bridge Park. This is built on a series of piers that used to be the major shipping area for the city of New York and the Port of New York. The piers closed down in the 1970s. It sat empty for many, many years. And then a public-private partnership emerged with the city, the state of New York, as well as a nonprofit. And they worked on raising funds and revitalizing this park. Now we have a series of piers that provide everything from kind of natural beauty like this to sculpture. Oi and yo are the two things you probably hear a lot in New York. If you've ever lived there, this is a temporary public art. This is the Brooklyn Bridge right here. And movie nights. And a variety of things that go on in these parks really bring the parks to the people. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can do that. So, what do all these share in common? What are all these all about? Well, again, it's really about a partnership of many people moving very heavy things through a process, really, is the bottom line. These people are moving a giant rock to work on a trail in the city of Boston, where I used to live. And the big thing that we're seeing in the United States, especially, is that there are more and more signature parks being built. And the only way they're being built is through a collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. It's that joining together of the forces that really make these parks possible. And I'll give you one example. This is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is a 100-acre park that is being entirely privately funded. It is one family foundation that is funding a $360 million US project by Michael von Valkenburg and Associates to build a signature park. in the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Why are they doing this? They see it as a strategic advantage to keep people in the city, to attract business to the city, to make the life of the city better, and on and on. It is that kind of cementing relationship between the public and private sector that's really happening in cities across the United States. Here's another example. This is in Louisville, Kentucky. This is a 4,000-acre park that's 23 miles long, and this was built through a public-private partnership, public money as well as private money. It's actually run by a conservancy, a nonprofit, and they put about $120 million US dollars into it over about a 10-year period. It's fully open. It's actually forming a leg of a giant circulation system of hike and bike trails that they're trying to surround the city by. So a huge amount of work that went here. And they used the principles of Frederick Law Olmsted, who is kind of the patron saint of parks in the United States, to really get ahead of where development was happening and put this park in before the development came to it. So, what I do at the Trust for Public Land, we're an NGO based in the United States, is I study parks, and I study parks especially in the 100 largest cities. And just to give you an idea of what we are dealing with currently, you can see that we have over 22,000 parks, 2.1 million acres of land, and we work with 300 public park agencies and 167 parks nonprofits. And we get information from them every year that allows us to get a snapshot of what's going on in park systems. And a couple things about the 100 largest cities. It's about 20% of the population of the United States, and it contains about 65 million people. And the 100 largest cities grew by 1 million people in the last year, which is pretty amazing. Public park agencies spend about $7.5 billion a year, and for the first time we actually surveyed all of the parks nonprofits that are operating, and they basically spent almost $500 million in the current year. And this is changing very, very rapidly because most of those nonprofits have been founded since 2000. So it kind of mirrors the work that's being done in Bratislava and other cities around the world that you're seeing this joining together of forces. So let's talk about a couple other kind of important pieces. One of the big things that we're seeing in the United States is a real interest in volunteerism, and that volunteerism is coming from individuals as well as corporations or groups, affinity groups. And we're seeing more and more folks volunteering and coming out and helping with key projects. If we look at all the volunteers that have been working in the 100 largest cities, 16.9 million hours were contributed. If you put that into the a dollar amount, which we can do, it's $433 million US, huge value. It's the equivalent of over 8,000 positions in the Parks Departments, which is amazing. So, that's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of information, it's a lot of big things. How do you begin? And I want to really kind of focus on a couple other intersections that our first speaker touched on, but that are really seeming to work very, very well in US cities. The first one is arts and culture. It's a real key element, and you have a lot of communities that surround these areas where you want to do park development or park improvement, and you need to engage them. This is a plaza in Queens, New York, that is very multicultural, and they have different days in which different performances occur, usually on weekends. This is a snow tetrahedron. This is a giant snow tetrahedron. This was an artist who came up with the idea that we should do something with all the snow that falls all the time in the winter. So we created these giant snow tetrahedrons, and they lasted for, I think, about 4 months, which is pretty amazing because they were just giant blocks of ice at the end. But again, temporary public art. This is an area in Copenhagen. It's an abandoned, basically warehouse district that they turned into a pop-up food eating and drinking establishment. Vendors you can buy food from. Murals. This is probably, these two murals right here are probably part of one of the most famous alleys in San Francisco, which was the site of a lot of what was called liberation theology in the 1980s around protecting the rights of people in Central America. So it changed all the time. You can go there on a weekend and people are painting new murals, painting over old murals. Murals on streets are another big element. Again, bringing together that marrying of arts and culture with people to create an active space, something that's really interesting. Take that and apply it to an alley in the middle of downtown Wichita, Kansas, which I'm sure no one has been to. And this is a pop-up art festival, performance space, and eating area. Again, didn't cost much money, funded by private philanthropy and also some local businesses as a way to stimulate the economy. Lots of other ideas. These were some that I worked on. Everybody's heard of things like street pianos, putting old pianos in different parts of the city and allowing people to play them. This is a giant manual typewriter that was done by artists. Has anybody heard of Burning Man? Burners. Pop-up mini golf. Winter storytelling with hot chocolate and marshmallows. String art. 36,000 strands of string that form a maze that's temporary that people can walk through during a festival. Again, these don't have to be expensive or long-term or even lasting more than a couple hours. But that trial, that bringing people into the space, that kind of making people feel the space is theirs, is a key thing in terms of how we work in terms of developing parks. Music. This is a band of 36 trombones. It's very loud. And they did, the biggest thing they did was the Star Wars theme. It makes it really popular. But they did a series of pop-up festivals in a park I worked in. Temporary artwork. Shipping containers with murals outside, with hung art inside, and giant murals around. Cheap plastic chairs that don't need to cost a lot. A lot of kind of temporary interventions that we try. And then food and art. I mean, if you want people to be in the space, marry food and art together. This is a weekly festival, weekly art festival that occurs on the Rose-Kennedy Greenway in Boston, May through October. And it's a huge draw for the tourists that come and visit Boston. Couple more. This is Discovery Green. This is in the middle of Houston, Texas. This was a 7-acre surface parking lot that the city decided to build a parking garage underneath and then give over the land to basically a nonprofit that built a 7-acre parking lot. And now it's one of the biggest destinations for the city. It's right across from their convention center. So just to kind of give you an idea, to kind of sum up what the potential is. We're seeing a lot of collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. I gave you those big numbers at the beginning. Here's some breakouts by city that give you an idea of what the combination that's being put together is working. Now, by and large, most of it is still public money. And the big challenge that we have in the United States, especially, is to continue to lobby our public officials to make sure that they fund parks to the level that they need to be funded at. But we always know we can't get enough money, so we have to look to the private sector for raising funds. And that's where our parks nonprofits do everything they can to raise funds from philanthropists, local businesses, surrounding neighbors, the government as well. And it's that combination of many sources of funding that have allowed us to kind of experience, in some ways, the golden age of parks in the United States. There's plenty of work to do. We haven't solved all the problems by any stretch of the imagination, but that combination of working together is a key thing. And just to kind of leave you with some ideas, it requires time. It requires effort on both sides to work together to believe that you're doing something for the public good. We always refer to a series of steps that you can make, but it starts with those little things, those little interventions, and over time, you can get to that point. Central Park was not rebuilt in 1 year. It took 38 years to get to the point where it's actually in good working order. And now they're starting to replace everything again because it's wearing out, because they have record attendance. Same thing with most parks, most places. So, a lot of experimenting going on. Small interventions do really great things. You know, different partners have different strengths and weaknesses. Some cities are going to be stronger, some cities are going to be weaker. Some nonprofits are going to be stronger, some nonprofits are going to be weaker. It's like dating. It really is like dating. You try things. If you try something once and it doesn't work, well, it's too bad. But like our first speaker said, experiment. Paint doesn't cost a lot. Traffic cones don't cost a lot. Public, temporary tables and chairs don't cost a lot. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. The reason why we call Charlie is also because Bratislava is in heavy capitalistic mind. So while the city doesn't have funds for some reasons, and there is a lot of money in developer sector, and we've seen for some years that developer was the synonym of the evil. So we also bring him to widen this discussion. It doesn't have to be just evil, it can be a source of money, and if you think wisely, you can use it wisely. So now I pass the microphone into the audience. If you have some question on him, any kind of question.
Hello, my name is Ina Halova and I'm working with City Architect of Bratislava. And my question is, this organization, Trust for Public Land, is private or public?
We're a nonprofit, we're an NGO, so we raise all the funds that we use to actually do the work that we do. So we're in 30 cities across the United States. We have about 350 people, and we do two things. We buy land, and we transfer that to a public agency, and then we build parks on a lot of that land and transfer that to a public agency. So we work on behalf of people in many communities around the country, really as an assistant to government. And the projects that we work on are usually very complicated, and they're usually in cities that have not seen a lot of investment in a long time. So some of the cities that we work in are New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. So we are a public benefit nonprofit is what we refer ourselves to.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to ask, is it this private funding or raising private funds, is it only a matter of voluntary funding, or are there some method of regulation or some motivation of developers to produce parks?
Yeah, great question. Regulations vary from city to city and from state to state in the United States, and some cities have strong funding mechanisms that essentially require developers, especially for building residential housing, to fund. Basically, it's a per unit or per bedroom fee that then goes into either acquiring new parkland, building new parks, or revitalizing current parks. But we see most of our funding is private that we get. So it's coming from, it's voluntary contributions from philanthropy, it's grants from family foundations across the United States. There is some public money, but that's mostly for land acquisition, and that comes from a federal source of funds. It really kind of, I'd say about 80% of our funding is private.
Do you see a risk that the public funds will go down if the private funds go up? On the other hand, the government will go back and say it's all private?
The
That's
question
not our
of the hour.
concern.
Yes. So far in the first two budget cycles, since we've had the new president, it has not. It's actually increased slightly. And part of the reason for that is most of the lobbying, most cities see public land and public parks as a strategic investment, and their representatives are constantly badgering our federal representatives, especially in the House of Representatives, which is the more conservative side of the federal government, to continue to level funding. So the two first years have been more like the Obama budget than we thought they would be. I guess is what I would say. Stay tuned.
More questions?
Sorry, the public budget is more bigger than private budget.
It's much bigger, yes.
It's much better. It is maybe 80% of the total price.
More, yeah.
Yes, it's a normal situation.
More often than not, we went through a period, in the United States, we went through a period of great disinvestment in public spaces. And that period was from the late 1960s to really the late 1980s, in which most cities saw a tremendous exit of people, residences living in cities to the suburbs, the immediate area surrounding. So cities couldn't afford a lot of maintenance and operation, programming, as well as capital replacement. So the rise of organizations like the Central Park Conservancy were a response to that. They were saying, we need to kind of make up the difference. So just to give you an idea, the Central Park Conservancy raises and spends about $120 million US every year for that park. It's one of the busiest parks in the United States. It gets in excess of 80 million visitors a year.
Okay. And any more questions? Because that would be almost last question. My last question would be, because you've been here for now second time already in the area, like first impressions of Kolárovo, Mickiewičke and green infrastructure of Bratislava, because explain this topic.
Sure. So I've only been here about 24 hours, so that's the caveat. But the thing I will say is, quite honestly, you have a better public transportation system than most cities in the United States. You do, believe it or not. We don't invest heavily in public transportation except in key cities, like the one I live in or the ones I live in. The other thing we have is we have a lot bigger issues with sprawl. We also, car is king, so that would be the one thing I would say is consistent with here. People are obsessed with where to park, how much they're going to pay to park, how far they have to walk from their car to wherever they're going. And I would argue that we're seeing a change in a number of cities away from that, because people are realizing that cities are actually filling up and they're getting busier, and people live in multifamily or multi-unit complexes versus living in single-family houses. So we're seeing a lot of the same issues that you're facing. But just to kind of think about kind of traffic flows and patterns, the biggest issue with a lot of traffic projects in New York, in Boston, and Washington was it's cars wanting a through route that's faster through the city. They're taking shortcuts to the city, and who is suffering is the people in public transportation and the people actually trying to walk in the city. And it's people advocating for that in a stronger, more vibrant way.
Hi Charlie, my name is Peter, and I would like to know your opinion on building parks on let's say existing parking lots and putting parking lots underground, and changing existing parks for underground parking lots and just revitalizing.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, the park. What's the idea? How is it maybe in the US?
So there have been a number of projects done in the last 15 years, I would say, that have taken above ground parking garages or surface parking lots and put them underground and built a park on that. The challenge with them is they're very expensive, and you really need a strong public sector or a lead commercial developer to help kind of drive the bulk of the spending, because the expensive part is not the park, it's the parking garage and excavating, and what you're going to find as you excavate. Especially in very old cities, you're going to find lots of artifacts that you need to deal with. One of the things that we're doing a lot of is converting schoolyards, which are they're like parking lots in our cities, to parks that can handle things like stormwater capture. So they have rain gardens, they can handle a large amount of water, they cool the area down, and they also have an art component. So we try to work with community groups to figure out what are the most important aspects to those and how we can implement them. That's something that we can do more on the private side.
There'll be a chance to talk to all of you. And now please stay until 3 when we have a coffee break. So it's the last presentation. And that will be held by Dutch lady, Willemijn de Voer, if I pronounce it correctly. And as you see, the thinking behind this presentation triangle was mobility plan, something on the green area, because this is an essential aspect of it. And we invited Mickiewičke to WhatCity because we like what she's doing with the people. And many of you said, collaboration, stakeholder, and you see some ugly people in the end who don't want to give you any money. And you are working a lot with people, maybe maybe different little bit area, like empty buildings and management, but we were really interested in knowing how Netherlands is actually open to different form of collaborations between stakeholders. So I hope this will give us some food for thought, since we have a lot of collaborations. Okay, so this is your presentation. Yeah.
hour, so my head is thinking of 1,000 things. I tried to make a short presentation for you from 3 projects that I'm running now at the moment. I'm founder and director of ANA Real Estate and Culture. I founded the company 10 years ago because I wanted to bring people together, and I saw a lot of empty buildings in the city of The Hague, and I thought, let's try and use those empty buildings as a platform in a temporary space until they're permanently reused. And that worked out really well, and in the 10 years from the temporary use, we've also had projects now that are sustainable and long-term, and also more connected to the city. And I didn't start to be a real estate manager, so what I think is nice is to share knowledge and to constantly look around and share and adapt. So if you have any questions in between, please just ask, because well, I like that. First project we just started this year. It's nice that you have an American here. It's the former American Embassy. It's right in the historical city center. The old buildings were destroyed during the Second World War. It's a national monument nowadays. It's Royer, architect. It's been a monument since 1 year. And the city bought it already 10 years ago from the Americans. It took them 10 years to have a new place, and on 1st of March they got the key of the building. So we had 10 years to think about what the impact of this building could be on the surrounding area. There were lots of ideas and thoughts, but I think the city, together with the cultural, the museums in the area, there are a lot of museums, thought of an idea to develop a museum quarter. And they pitched the idea the first time on a closed platform. It's called Haasebodem, The Hague Soil. And it's run by a couple of volunteers who bring different stakeholders together and look at the area, the empty buildings, and how to connect them to make an impact for the city. So they pitched the idea of a museum quarter, and it lifted up really well. One of the big things from this first session was they were building a big parking garage underground, under a historical part of the city, and it was called after the street name, and they changed it to the museum quarter. But then after this first session, the more slow development of vision and strategy started. This is the area. This is where, is there a pointer? This is where the former embassy is. You can see it's quite big. This is where the city government of the Netherlands is. And here, this is all historical old buildings. And this is where you come into the city. So it's really a starting point where you can make an impact on how you experience the city. And I think the city government, of course, sees this as a possibility to attract more tourists, more economics. But the city is not the only stakeholder. So for the city, it's about economics, to enhance the cultural sector with the musea, but it's also to brand and position the city as a touristic part better. But there are a lot of people living there as well, the residents, and it's quite an old, it's a bit touchy, but quite a bit old-fashioned. It's chic. It's a chic area. Lots of former politicians and people with high functions are having their retirement. So there are lots of foundations and boards, and everyone has an opinion on something. They want it to be a really nice living area. Lots of green, not a lot of activities. Tourists, they're afraid will turn into Amsterdam. It will never turn into Amsterdam, but and the entrepreneurs there, they're quite okay. They just want to have the right target group for their businesses, and they see this opportunity. So the city actually is in the need of developing the area, and they have this key project with the embassy. But first, they started to focus on the public space. So they pitched the idea of a museum quarter, and then actually they took like 10 steps back and started with their own responsibility, and that's the public area. So they made a whole plan for the outside with the pedestrian and the connections, the signing as well. They wanted to have that you can actually experience that you're in a different part of the city. They also set up quite a small stakeholder platform. I think only about 12 people are in there, mostly representatives from the residential parties there, but also a couple of big stakeholders from the musea and their theaters and a couple of those. They've been talking for almost 2 years, making small steps, and now it's it's speeding up. So this year they actually made budget free for an external programmer to connect the ideas that are already there, to connect programmings that are in the area and see if they can put them outside. So they're trying to make the connection to the public space, because that is where they actually have ownership over. And share the ownership with the parties who can deliver the program. So not add extra program, but see if they can get the program inside of the buildings outside. They're also pushing on pop-up functions. See, and they have a little budget to actually make that happen. Pop-up expos, theater. And this year they're also taking another step into the branding, the city marketing. Everyone is a bit afraid that it will be an extra layer. So they're doing the branding first layer, quite a small way, but in external, in the public space. So the benches, the signing, and then the next step, hopefully end of the year, is that it will be a website or something, as long as the platform of the other stakeholders accept it. And this year they finished, it's more internal for the city, but a sort of a vision document where they have a long-term strategy with a few key, 9 key projects in different stages. So that there's the first stage for the first 3 years, then 5, and then 10 years. And somehow, it's not really visible for everybody, but they do say that they involved everyone in the city. But it's not really, so it's a bit blurry process for all of us. So when you're talking about stakeholder management, it's a bit, the city, the people in the city are a bit wondering what's happening there. So, points of interest I wanted to give to you is the differences from the long-term and the short-term stakes. The city, of course, thinks on the long term, and the residents living there, they just want to have a nice, quiet place where they can live and the economics of the city, and then we want to attract more traffic. It's not really for them an interesting, it's not their stake. And what I noticed also is that when you have this, when you focus on the people who are direct stakeholder of an area, you also want to have the future users of that area involved, and that's really difficult one, I think. Especially in The Hague, we have a segregation, we're known for it in Holland. And this part is really separated from the other part. Well, it's a beautiful part. So the next generation or the younger generation is kept out of this whole process because they're not directly in this area. And for this American embassy, I really thought about it when you were telling us about the design center. This embassy is a key project, and the city bought it, but they're not really developers, so they don't think as the end entrepreneur who actually has to develop it. So now they have to tender it because it's a public thing, so they have to have an open, transparent process. But all these different stakeholders in the city, everybody is looking at it, has an idea about it, and then the politicians are having these ideas. Does it cost money for us? Does it look good? Is it a master project I can score with or not? And it's probably not, because it's a monumental building and you have to invest in it, and the investment will be, it's not measurable. It's a thing in a old city center. You probably will know if it's available. It will take another maybe 100 years before an opportunity like this will be available. So you have to really think about what to do with it. And some people think about money it will cost, and if it will be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it will have good return of investment. You don't. So the design center, I was thinking like, yeah, you should really try and get some good examples to the ministry so that they can develop that part in a good way, because it's your key project. This project is in the Binkhorst. It's close to the city center. I think it's 5 minutes walk actually, but it's on the wrong side of the city center. So for years it's been a large industrial area with a lot of car industries. And when the crisis came in 2000, all the master plans, they failed, and the city chose to have an organic way of facilitating the development of the area, which is a role that don't really, still are learning how to facilitate an organic process. Nobody actually knows what an organic process is. But now the market is getting better, and there are a lot of big developers taking their position into the area, buying up old places like this, with the idea to develop housing there. So this place is bought by a really large developer in Holland, BPD. And in 5 years time they're thinking of building houses there. And in the meantime they've asked us, Anna, to make a cultural hub there, aimed at musicians, and start placemaking and see how we can use this place to actually enhance the values that are already in this rough industrial terrain, because it's not only industrial, it's also a place for experimenting, for creative people to have a cheap workspace, and startups, and this is the area. Really, with the little things, that's our National Train Company logo. Those are the 3 big fast train stations. The city center is over here. This is the area. It's really big. And I think the program now, about 5,000 houses will be built in the next 10 years, and probably will be even more. And the city doesn't really have a vision. They don't have there's no master plan anymore. So the answer of the market is we'll make our own master plan, and the people already in the area did the same. So there are two big parties. This is the one from the people who were already in there, the entrepreneurs, artists who were working there. They've united in the Aanbink. It's the investment, short for investment maatschappij, it's Dutch, but it's supposed to be an investment fund for the long term. And they're trying to do all these pop-up things that I think the other two presenters already talked about. Pop-up interventions, streets, closing down streets, having festivals. They really know the area, they know everything there, they know a lot of the history, but they're not commercial, they're not really big. This is the answer from the developers. It's really smooth. They call themselves city makers, and they're down there. You can see all their about 10, 12 the big developers. Both of them made a manifest and gave it to the city, asking for a vision, asking for directions, and giving them the legislation to develop and to invest in the area. I think maybe for developers this is really interesting. They in this manifest they describe 10 rules for developing in the area. So in a way it's the same as the booklet about advertising rules, but the developers made rules how to develop in this area and still keep the identity for the city of this industrial rough area. It's all in Dutch, I'm sorry. We're not really international in this way. This was, one of the rules is use the public space as a framework for the area. So they looked at the big infrastructure and how to make a connection with outside and inside. The fifth one was, of course, have good, slow, like in Ljubljana, slow traffic connections where everything mixes. A little bit of the same, where you have slow cars and pedestrians and cyclists together. The first one actually was cherish the rough character of the area, which is a really this point of debate. But what is the identity of an area? Everyone has a rough. It's too big. So they're also trying to actually label and describe this identity criteria, the core values of the area and how to measure them. And the second one was the human scale. Because if you add to an industrial area so many houses, then I think they can develop up to 70 meters. That's really high for Dutch standards. We're not used to high skyscrapers. That's not Dutch. So, and of course they make the most money for developers. So how can you still have this human scale and make your money? Work together was also a principle. Not only with the city, but with the developers among themselves, the people who are already in there, and also make sure that you add value in the context of the city. So not only the area, but also look at the city itself. And that's quite interesting because in The Hague, and maybe it's whole of Holland, we're really good at overdoing the planning part. So this part is not really planned, so we try to cherish this not planned part in the city, which is quite difficult for us to just let it go a little bit. And in this area, not like Museum Quarter, the city doesn't really have a vision, so they're struggling, and they only know we have to have this amount of housing added to the city, and we need to have economics grow. So that's their focus. Then we have the cultural sector that cherishes this area for the experimental part, the roughness. Then we have the market developers that actually are black and white. You have the ones that are there for the long term, who want to develop really quality, good projects, like the ones we hear here that have a heart for the city. But you also have a lot of free riders that just buy a small, buy cheap and want to build blocks and just make a lot of money. Then there are already living a couple of people, not so much, I think maybe only 100 or something, but they really have a big voice because they're the first, they're kind of pioneers in this strange area, and they're fighting for the facilities and so they can, where are the schools, where are the parks, where are the shops, there are no shops there. And through AMBIG, they're the entrepreneurs already active in that area who want to have a sustainable perspective. Can they still pay the rent? Can they still do their work when people are living around them? Or are they then all of a sudden harassing their neighbors when you make noise or something? You know? They're industrial makers. I try to sum up a little bit of this strategy, because again here the city is focusing on what they own and then mostly the public space, but it's too big to make a plan for the whole area, and it also contradicts with the fact that they don't have a vision, so they just start small with a few routes that are interesting. They bought a little bit of real estate to actually develop themselves, to attract startup companies, because they think the market will fail with that. And they signed for the whole area that it can be in national legislation as an experiment, which didn't really work out that they have experimental legislation, but it does. A lot of people think it made it more difficult actually to have it clear where you can develop housing, where you can have retail, where you can have public schools. We're just now in an experimental phase, not really making things clear. The market made this manifest, and they're lobbying, and they're also trying to have the temporary use to already experiment a bit with different functions and how to work together with the housing. The same as with the entrepreneurs, and they really work well together. The residents and the entrepreneurs in the market, they're now all making a front with the city or towards the city, demanding more perspective, more framework to go further. And here it's really interesting that you have this change of scale. I don't know if it's also here in Bratislava, but you have this period where nothing happens and everything is cheap, and you can do what you want, and you can add value on a different level. And then when I think maybe the association is when the developers come and when the money comes, that goes down the drain. And here they're trying to keep the added value from that period when the economics were low, and try to bring it into the next level, the next scale. But you see that the parties active on the lower scale are having a really hard time communicating and manifesting themselves in a bigger scale. It's a different talk, it's a different finance, different numbers, a different perspective. So it's really interesting to see this happening. But all of them say they have the same prerogative, and that is keeping the core values safe of the area. And that's a good thing. And everyone is trying to organize themselves, organize the stakeholders, which is a big experiment. So I don't have an answer. I wish that I had, but by trying, it's already a good sign. Just try to get together and know each other and see each other. And it's working really well there. There's the debate going on about these values. There's a debate going on this different scales that are the jumping in the scales. And the last one is EA Tech. It's a bit different. That's second company I co-founded with two tech guys. It's in the heart of the city. Yeah, okay. This is in the Central Innovation District. This is the big forest actually, it's part of it. Here the city is a stakeholder. The market is really not stakeholder on the stage. I think what I wanted to tell you about this part is the entrepreneurs are really active. They're building a community. In this case, it's a tech community, which connects to all the participants, all the stakeholders in the area. So they connect to the government, they connect to knowledge institutes, they connect to the businesses. And with this community, you can also take ownership of the area you're all in together. So that's growing. I think that could be an interesting way of involving stakeholders without having this positioning pro or against, but you're all in there for the same. Yeah. Oh yeah, and the ecosystem, that's what I mean with the community. So try to share it and not say it's your ecosystem or it's my ecosystem. Sorry, I had to rush a bit through the end.
Thank you very much. This is the last slide.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well.